Good.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Wendellberry, you read much Wendellberry?
Pardon?
Do you know Wendellberry's
No,
work?
I don't.
You can get me to talk about him at some point. I'll tell
Okay.
you.
That's terrific. It has, you know, hello world, it's me, Dennis, and I'm on the air with Jim Crosby. Howdy, Jim.
Hi, Dennis.
We have come at a time, what a time in history. I mean, it feels like that we're in an inflection point historically. And so we've come up, you and I connected through my wonderful producer, Donna Cosper, who told me about you, and I got a chance to read about your investment, time, and life in the Gandhian interpretation of Jesus and bringing nonviolence back into our consciousness. And so you are doing this in your life, you're doing it through your teaching, you're doing it through your writing, and I'd like to start there and help me to talk about this as a movement, as an importance, and as a venue of your life.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, at the past year I've gotten really involved with something specific called Nonviolent Austin, and I would encourage people that are interested to go on Facebook and request to become a member on Facebook of Nonviolent Austin.
Nonviolent Austin.
Yeah.
And this doesn't have to be just in Austin, right? I mean,
Correct.
It can be anywhere. Okay.
Yeah.
Nonviolent Austin. So
Yeah.
tell me the etymology of this.
So it's well, it goes back to Gandhi's, settling on satyagraha and calling what he did nonviolence, and going through. I heard John Deere, who I'll refer to some more later, talk about other options. Nonviolent seems, to be what it's not. It's not violent.
Right.
It seems like a negative term. But you think about the other terms, love. We could just characterize it as love. But the way that's used, it's watered down to peace, the same thing. So nonviolence is specifically referring back to, Gandhi and Gandhi's, like you said a while ago, interpretation of Jesus.
Exactly.
Because he was so informed, day to day through his adult life, Gandhi studied the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu scripture, that I think really gave him his discipline,
Yes.
and the Sermon on the Mount, which gave him, this idea of, Jesus talking about the kingdom of God, or the reign, of love, if you will. So that being the aspiration, and really kind of emphasizing the dignity of all human beings, and even, love of enemy. So how do we love our enemies into being friends? And, Gandhi was so good about that with, for 30, 40 years in the struggle for Indian independence, saying the British are just going to walk out of here one day. They're going to understand that 100,000 British folks in India can't control 300 million of us unless we let them, okay? And we're going to quit letting them. And so developing this satyagraha, or truth force, or soul force, and experimenting with nonviolent civil disobedience, civil resistance, and social change. So, and of course, Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement really picked that up and brought it to the United States and made it real here. And as you indicated a while ago, to an extent we've let it slide.
Yes.
We haven't kept up that practice, and it needs to be seen, I think, as a whole life practice, so that I start with myself and seek to become more nonviolent with myself, with you, with the
Thank
people
you.
I encounter, and then the way John talks about it, John Deere has got a wonderful, fairly recent book called The Nonviolent Life, and it's divided into 3 parts, and it starts with being nonviolent toward myself, and then interpersonal relations, and then the third part is, how does he phrase it? Something like becoming part of the growing global movement of nonviolence.
I'm so glad that you put it that way, because it's an order, for me it's an order of operations. Just like math. If you multiply before you divide, before you add, you're going to come up with a different answer. And if I don't start with being nonviolent toward myself, I can do everything to the world, and I'm not going to make the kinds of changes.
Right.
It has to be first. I first had, how am I willing to be and to be kind toward myself, toward all the voices and all the. So you came to that first. Did you do this through therapy? Did you do this through prayer, through meditation, through combination of that?
Yeah, a combination. Mostly through. I had in my early college days, had basically having been raised in a fairly liberal Christian environment, Episcopal church and Episcopal school, had a really evangelical conversion experience, and for several years I was really immersed in quiet time, as they called it, and Bible study. Each morning, trying to take half hour to an hour of Bible study and prayer. So I think, like the Bhagavad Gita for Gandhi, that kind of set my discipline.
Yes.
And it's continued even as I've grown somewhat more liberal, theologically, politically, socially.
Sure.
Through the years. So it's become meditation to a great degree. About 15, 16 years ago, I joined the Episcopal Third Order Franciscans, and you write your own rule of life, and it includes things like that. So it's been a real matter of practice for me as far as those kind of things go, and then it branches on into interpersonal relations, and part of our Franciscan discipline is thinking then on about social conscience and reaching out,
Exactly.
and trying to make the world a better place.
So how are we doing this in Austin?
I wrote down a list of groups that I wanted to give a shout out to, just because I think so many people are doing so much great work in Austin.
Isn't that the truth? That's one of the things that we want with Reasonably Spontaneous Conversation is
Right.
that is to promote the things that are going on in Austin that are really, it appears to me, I mean, when we came here 7, 8 years ago, one of the reasons why is that Austin appears to be a scalable for the world, that it can work here. This is a great incubator community for things that will work around the world, and that's what when Don and I began to come back and to do Reasonably Spontaneous Conversation, and then brought Bradley on board, and so we're all where we're working from this core to go out. That's what we want to do. We want to showcase the wonderful things that are going on here in Austin and the people who are doing it.
Can I give that shout out?
Damn right.
And it may mean that people can look these folks up, or you can bring them in, or you probably have half of them.
And in addition to that, we will put on the website these links, the names of these, so that we can
Okay,
continue.
great. So for several years, I've been going to meetings the first Tuesday of each month in the evening of Austin Justice Coalition. They've been amazing as far as spending 18 months, for example, up through last December, working with the city on the new police contract. And,
Wonderful.
And getting a fair amount of oversight, citizen oversight in there, and but working closely with the police union, et cetera. And so they've done Gandhian nonviolence in doing that.
How exciting! But I've wondered about that, because one of when I go up to policemen, I say, well, who is the greatest de-escalator that you know? Who do they reward de-escalation? Somebody who can take a situation, bring it down to wherever, and wouldn't that be a wonderful skill to teach?
Yeah, and I know that's part of the program these days. So
that makes me so happy.
Yeah. So IACT, are you familiar with IACT, Shirley?
No.
Interfaith Action of Central Texas.
Yes, now.
They do the Red Bench programs regularly, et cetera, and just really trying to foster interfaith dialogue and understanding and compassion. And that leads right into the next one, Compassionate Austin, which has been going for several years and is doing great work. And I know they were involved with one of the others I want to mention, which is the New Story Festival that happened at Houston Tillotson in April. And it's just a wonderful new thing that I think they're planning to make an annual deal and build community through the year in between. So really exciting. Veterans for Peace has been around at least since Vietnam days, and there's an active group here, and we'll be working with them some. Nonviolent Austin will in the next week or so, and the Austin Friends meeting, the Quakers, and the Unitarian Universalist Church on commemoration of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So there'll actually be something at the First Unitarian Universalist next Saturday, the 3rd of August, for commemoration, and then I think on the 7th, which is Wednesday night, there will be and this is going to air on this Wednesday night, right?
Who knows
so,
when
but
this
anyway,
is going to air?
yeah.
All right. Well, how does
I
this
think Wednesday the
will
7th
have happened?
Okay, yeah. Well, at Lunef Point, we're going to do a commemoration also of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's going to be, I think, involve a release of doves, etc. Lunef Point on Lady Bird Lake in Zilker Park on that night. So, and this is something that goes back here at least to the years shortly after 9/11. We would do that on an annual basis.
Yeah.
So, quite wonderful. The Front Porch is a group that gathers monthly through mainly the school year, weekly, usually at Schultz's, and just really showcases local musical talent, but puts it in a context of discussing, just kind of like you just did with Nancy Scott, right?
Yes.
Where the songs are coming from and stuff. So quite wonderful. Undoing White Racism, Austin, Courageous Conversations. Wonderful work is going on in terms of racial reconciliation and healing, I think. So Community First, as far as working with the homeless, and you talked about a scalable model. That's something that Alan Graham and Mobile Loaves and Fishes have had in mind from the start, I think. Let's do something that can be experimental, that we can make as good as we can, and that we can let the rest of the country and the world know about, and they can do it there too. So, and I think he's having some success as far as attention, and I think it was recently in People magazine. Yeah. So the Sierra Club, obviously, and one of the things I was delighted about when I started, I'll refer some to the national links of Nonviolent Austin. I was delighted when I first started hearing about these national organizations that they were being as comprehensive as they were. There's a phrase that the World Council of Churches has used for 30-some years, justice, peace, and the integrity of creation. As, and we've long had, I think Pope John Paul II or somebody said, if you want justice, if you want peace, work for justice, right? So those two have been linked, but as a teacher of theology over the last 25 years or so, ecological awareness has become so much more part of what needs to happen, on a human, pervasive, global basis, but also in theology. Okay, what is our theology of this? How does it relate to what we think about absolute, truth, or ultimate truth? And so things like the Sierra Club, all kinds of good ecological organizations here. Casa Marinella and Austin Tan Cerca de la Frontera, as far as the work that they do with refugees here and going down to the border and stuff, and immigrants. My friend Walter Long, his wife Jennifer Long is the director of Casa Marinella, working with refugees for years. Walter, a number of years ago, started something called the Texas After Violence Project that I would refer people to online, etc. So there's these wonderful organizations, and I hesitated in starting Nonviolent Austin because, of my level of involvement to some degree and desire to be involved, and yet with those others, and not wanting to take anything away from them. So, but what I'm excited about with Nonviolent Austin is that we can offer nonviolence as, sometimes the missing link, or, to nonviolence training for the whole community. I would love to take it to congregations, to existing groups. Some of these groups might be, want more training for, people that are involved. So that's my hope for Nonviolent Austin, that it becomes not an umbrella organization, but a facilitator for all of these wonderful things.
Well, can we dig a little deeper into the word violence?
Yeah.
Because when I hear when I post something on Facebook, and I get some of the communication that comes back to me feels violent. It feels like that violence can be there, and so there is a communication element that I want to be able to bridge the gap between myself and people with whom I might not share an ideological point of view.
Right.
But it's really important that I take ownership for my part.
Right. Yeah. And be sensitive to yourself in terms of how much abuse can I take, You know, what is that? What is loving my enemy in this situation?
That's
you know?
what I'm asking. I'm asking on how,
yeah.
because to me, it's the dialogue
Yeah.
that has that I don't know if it's either broken down or never done, whatever it is in this new level. It appears to me that it's more of a we're into a new level, like a video game. Suddenly we're at a higher level, so the same skills that I had at a lower level is going to require. So things are moving faster. There's all the new, and in this new nodal interconnected world. So in this, how do we? How can give me some thoughts?
Well, the thing that springs to my mind, you know, this relates to self-knowledge and sensitivity to oneself, and you know the kind of self-work we were talking about. There's a page in Interbeing, which is one of my favorite short books by Thich Nhat Hanh, a great Buddhist writer these days, and he says, well, in Buddhism, you've got, you know, the Four Noble Truths, and the first one is that you know, suffering is pervasive in life,
right?
Unavoidable. You're going to have suffering, and part of the goal is to not only acknowledge that, but to try to alleviate it. You know, again, for ourselves, for others, those around us. The knowledge of suffering and pursuing, you know, truth and understanding about what's going on in the world runs the risk for us of increasing our own suffering, you know, especially as we wade into situations where, you know, we're trying to make it better. And we can get that kind of resistance sometimes you're talking about, or, you know, lack of understanding, if that's what it is, or violence, whether it's psychological, verbal, physical. And so at one point he says, we really need to balance our perception of that first noble truth with the third noble truth, which is there is something you can do about it, you know. And one of the things he says you can do about it is look at the things, spend time with the things that are true, good, and beautiful for you. You know, he talks about green bamboo, et cetera, you know. So the senses, you know, art, the things that really bring us to life, you know, he says, and that's, you're asking about, you know, my practice of meditation, prayer, et cetera. Spending time doing those things every day, I think, is essential to, you know, then being prepared to, and I guess I would go on from there and say, you know, what has served me in my attempts as a teacher, et cetera, is kind of the Socratic method. Try to draw people out, you know, and say, well, tell me a little more about why it is you think or feel that way, you know, and just try to really understand. And ideally, you know, if a person feels accepted, understood, loved, maybe inspired, maybe knowing you still disagree, but still feels heard, then they might get to the point of saying, okay, why do you and I disagree about it? What do you think? You know?
Exactly.
So
I think being heard, feeling heard. I know that whenever my frustrations always come from whether or not I feel heard, or whether or not I've said what I've needed to say. When you look out over your students now, when you look out at your students, what do you see any changes in their perception being in the digital, being digital natives? We're digital immigrants.
Dinosaurs, I call myself.
We always have to make that translation from analog to digital in our mind. They're digital natives. Is the wiring there? What's going on when you're looking at their eyes and you're looking at what's going on? Give me some generalities.
The great frustration as a classroom teacher is, you know, I'm not as disciplined as I should be about saying, okay, while we're here together, and it's basically my classes are seminar style, I want us to be able to look each other in the eyes. I want you to interact with each other. If you're hiding behind your computer screen, you're not doing that. If you're, you know, attentive to whether your mom is texting you or not, you're not doing that. And so, but I'm not good about keeping the box in the middle of the room for phones or whatever it is, you know, throughout the year. So I struggle with that. But I do feel that there's that we have, you know, as a species changed some, and you know, these things that are extensions of us are, we risk our technology owning us rather than owning it, you know, if I can put it that way. And so I struggle with that, and you know, try to, my colleague Jim Woodruff, who teaches the other half of the senior class, is much better about okay, let's get outside. Let's walk around. Let's have a moving classroom experience. And so my last year, I think this year before I retire, is I'm going to try to do a lot more of that. But yeah, trying to look people in the eye and encourage them to do that as well. So,
I've call myself an Austin greeter. That's a personal. It's a personal of my. I agree. I look people right in the eyes and go, hello.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just and it's amazing to me to see how warm it's being returned. There is there is this hunger for connection.
Yeah.
You know, growing up in a small town in Texas, you know, it's a howdy.
Yeah.
How you doing?
Yeah.
There was always
or the
nod
West Texas wave as you go by in the car.
As
Yeah.
you go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So my friend Ann Hoey used to always talk about that. She's a great Episcopal preacher, and in her sermon she would mention the West Texas wave for sure. But yeah, I do want to say though that my students in recent years have really struck me. We developed a number of years ago a school prayer at St. Stephen's, and tried to be interfaith and open to all in the development of that, and it's really been taken on by the kids, and so in chapel every day, whether they're engaged or involved or not, a high percentage say that prayer, and it talks about making a difference in the world, and I really see students these days oriented toward that, and so that's real hopeful to me.
It is to me too. I see when I talk with business executives, I work as a communication coach, and then they talk about millennials, about how they feel entitled or whatever mythology they're saying, and I say, now hold on a second. What I find is that they want not to be CEO on day one, but they want purpose. You have to connect with purpose. Why is what I'm doing important to the success of the organization? And that's on you as a leader to connect to them with that purpose, because if you do, they will go above and beyond anything you could imagine.
Yeah. There was a year or so ago, there's a wonderful article by Dalai Lama. He co-wrote with somebody, but talking about that, the lack of purpose and the relation of that to depression, etc.
It is to me.
Yeah. So
whenever I get off of purpose, I mean that's the whole thing. And so how do you stay patient with on day to day being out on the street, being out connected and all, and just knowing that you're doing, as our Patricia Wilson, wonderful author and writer, does, doing what is to be done by you.
Well, just trying to hold myself to it and discern day to day and moment to moment what it is that's to be done by me and doing it. But again, going back to that daily practice, and doing it individually and having practices that are in community as well, where we're encouraging each other to do it.
And I've been studying a little bit about field theory and how all we carry around a field and all. And so if there is something to that, and we are connecting that, then we would never know when that tipping point would be. When my self-love, my instant of kindness, my little would be the tipping point of the time. And so if it isn't, then every single moment is sacred.
Yeah. And that old story of the 100th monkey, you remember that?
Exactly.
And that's enough butterfly wings.
So if I don't know, I'm going to play as if I do. So I'm going to play as if every moment, as if this conversation with you, Jim, and to be able to sit here with you is as sacred as it gets. Because if I don't play that way, then I'm off somewhere else.
Paul Tillich talked about the eternal now. Can I see the connection that this is eternity, right here and now?
It doesn't, and so it just doesn't get any better. It doesn't get any better, and so it gives me a lot of hope. Because when I think about this, like I'm 71 this year, and I think back over like if the universe is like 14.6 billion years old. I didn't seem to be bored in that 14.6 billion years, and I've got this little 71-year-old window, and then whatever is the part, it's just got to be more complex than what I would just
Yeah.
think it to be, that I could conceive of it, like Feynman said, right? God is too large for the stage.
Yep. Outgrew the, what do they call it, the proscenium.
Yeah.
Can I tell you a little about these two
Oh, hell yeah.
named organizations? So actually there's three. If you go back 30 years, something started called Pace e Bene Nonviolent Service, which is a group of Franciscans, active Catholic Franciscan brothers, I think, primarily. And they developed training for nonviolence training and delivered that around the country a good bit. For 30 years it's been now. 6 years ago they started Campaign Nonviolence, which focuses in part on the annual United Nations Day of Peace, September 21st. Around there, the week of that, they decided to, or they have gone for the past 6 years to Washington, D.C., assembled people there and done events and, nonviolence training and I think interacted some with legislature, et cetera, but be a presence, for that week around Peace Day. And then they started trying to do that around the country, in the week leading up to it, what are the events? And they're up to 2,000, 2,500, I think now, events around the country in that week before. And so about 3 years ago then, John Deere, who's one of the leaders of Campaign Nonviolence, was, I think, in Carbondale, Illinois for a talk and heard about nonviolent Carbondale. And they had gotten the city council to name it as a nonviolent city, and they had this list of things that they were trying to do and what a nonviolent city looks like. And so John kind of grabbed on that idea, and Campaign Nonviolence has since then started the Nonviolent Cities Project. So I'll give you these two flyers that they've put out. So that's about Campaign Nonviolence, and their website connects you to that, and their annual event in September especially.
CampaignNonviolence.org.
Yeah. And then the subset of that, 3 years old, is Nonviolent Cities Project. And it's got that list of quote unquote bullet points that says, okay, here's what we aspire
This is
to.
this is what a nonviolent city would look like.
Right. Yeah. So we've started out here in the past year with Nonviolent Austin saying, and like I say, started out mainly with a Facebook page. My friend said, who had tried to goad me into getting, looking at their photographs, et cetera, on Facebook for years and years, and I'd resisted. They say, okay, if you're going to get active, Crosby, you got to go get on Facebook and be an organizer. And so I got on Facebook, and it was kind of funny because two of them that were getting me started on it said, just play with it, you can't go wrong. And of course, immediately I went wrong. I had to have my personal page, and then I had this Nonviolent Austin page, and it was all mixed up. So, but anyway, I've waded into that over the past year, and then we've had a couple of wonderful meetings of a small group, the steering committee, and that's one of the key things that, John Deere has 10 steps, do this if you're going to, so very helpful material from the national group. My wife and I, well, going back a year, I was inspired. I went to a week-long thing that John Deere led called Following Jesus on the Path of Nonviolence. And that's really what inspired me to start Nonviolent Austin. Then this past month, the end of June, the start of July, so just a month ago, my wife and I got to go for a week. This organization had, well, it was the 30th anniversary of Pace Bene. So Campaign Nonviolence had this pilgrimage in Assisi, which is the hometown of St. Francis and St. Clair. And so my wife and I had spent a day in Assisi on our anniversary, and we got to go back and make it our 40th anniversary was May 5th, and so on our honeymoon we had been there for a day, so we got to go spend the week and celebrate our 40th anniversary and Pace Bene's 30th anniversary. And the teachers, John Deere, who's a former Jesuit and he remains a Catholic priest and just an incredible activist. I told you the other day he was inspired by and mentored by both the Berrigan brothers back in the 70s and 80s, and Dan and Phil Berrigan. And so he's just steeped in Gandhian, Kingian nonviolence and the connections with the New Testament and the Gospels. And so he taught that for a week last year, really inspired me. And then Tara and I got to go and spend a week with him and Ken Buddigan, who teaches at DePaul and just has really studied up. The week before our pilgrimage group was there, he was there with a group of his students, and he'd had the whole semester, spring semester, leading up to their time there, but with them and then with us, took us to these, historic sites. And so each morning we would have a worship service there in, one of the little chapels that St. Francis built with his hands, and with his brothers, or by St. Clare's crypt, and just this wonderful immersion. And John would preach to us a little bit, and then Ken would teach us about the historical situation, and just did wonderful analysis of kind of the early merchant situation as they were coming out of feudalism, and St. Francis's part in really bringing Europe out of feudalism by questioning, kind of the materialism, et cetera, of his day, and kind of going back, as he saw it, to Jesus, not only nonviolence, but Jesus, embrace of a simple life, to the point of talking about gospel poverty. And so it was just a really beautiful experience.
And if we get a chance to talk again, when we do, I mean, I want to talk about how does gospel poverty look in the abundant country that we live in, to keep it simple.
Yeah, and my first, when you said that phrase, repeated it back to me, I just thought of community first. I think we've got, people like Alan Graham who are, and volunteers for groups like Mobile Loaves and Fishes who are getting to know people who are not choosing poverty, and gospel poverty never says that material poverty in itself is a good thing, okay? It's the embrace of and the pursuit of simplicity in order to be able to serve those who, are not there by choice. So, yeah. What else? I know we're running out of time. What else do we need to do?
This has been so nice, Jim, because it's lovely to. Yeah. Do the pickup shots. Yeah. All right. Good enough. Well, I'm gonna right now. We're gonna get shots of you.
Okay.
And then you just listen to me talk. Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Yes. No, I think we ended in. Yeah, I would. No worries. No, I think we ended up. I think we ended exactly where we needed to end.
If you need a zinger, I've got a good quote.
Yeah.
I ran across this morning in my in my personal.
Hold on, we'll do that when you.
Okay. Okay.
Listen. What we're going to do is we're going to get shots of you listening to me.
Okay.
So that we can edit. If we needed to make an edit point,
right. Yeah.
You can just just kind of like nod at me as we're talking. One of the reasons why I wanted to make sure and have this conversation with you is because I'm feeling a deep pull in this opportunity to be able to, that the United States is at a particular place. It's in a very young democracy. It's not been around very long, and we're in a particular place where the we're saying, all right, what are we going to look like, feel like, taste like in the next 20 years? How are we going to make it through this time, especially in a time when many actors are attempting to call us to our lower natures and attempting to throw division as a weapon, and to be able to do that. And so what I want is how is that opportunity for us to be able to say, okay, now look, let's hang together, even though we do disagree, even though we are. Let's see if we can make it through. Let's have that as a principle, for the principle of this idea of what the United States was. What was it about? What was this something that we could use? How's that? That enough? Okay.
A pluribus
all
unum.
Right. Good. Now you talk.
Okay. I was just thinking a pluribus unum, from many one, right? And staying united. But I ran across this morning in my time of reflection and meditation. It's from the writings of Leo, Rufino, and Angelo, who were two of, I think, the original 12, brothers of St. Francis. He said, and this really speaks to me as a teacher for 26 years now, and I've read a lot, and I've often felt like should I be, or could I somehow be acting more on what I'm reading? And this really, it's a slight elaboration on the old saw, practice what you preach. You have as much learning as you put into practice, and you are as good a preacher as you do what you say.
Yeah. Do that again. Say that again to me, and make sure and keep your hands lowered, and so that
Okay.
it'll be out of the shot. And continue
almost
to
memorized
talk,
it.
and then elaborate on it.
You have as much learning as you, how do they put it, put into practice, and you are as good a preacher as you do what you say. So, we have this old phrase, practice what you preach. You have now a lot of people talking about, we've focused a lot through the centuries on, especially in Christian theology, etc.
Go ahead and keep the hand down.
Okay, we
Yeah.
focus so much on orthodoxy, which translated as right belief, and we need much more emphasis and attention to orthopraxy, which is right action. How do we, if we really believe it, if it matters to us, how are we putting it into practice? What's the pragmatic, what's the existential, result of these things that we hold dear? So
Can you actually ask that of your students?
yeah, I kind of spend the whole year doing that. Yeah. So those.
That's exactly. There's a phrase in